The Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, the 13th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Well, that same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat, and he sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, "Listen, a sower went out to sow. He sowed, some seeds fell on a path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they didn't have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, as they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. As they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. If you have ears, hear. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and doesn't understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what's sown on the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. But such a person has no root. It endures only for a while. When trouble or persecution arise on account of the word, that person falls away. As for what was sown among thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of this age and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. Before we get started, I have a little commercial break or advertisement, whatever, I don't know if any of you like to read obituaries. I used to read a newspaper, and there'd be obituaries, stories of people who just died, and I would look in there to make sure my name wasn't in there. And I'm sure you young people are saying, "What's a newspaper?" Yeah. But I don't have to read the obituaries in the paper anymore because my mother and my sister live in Cleveland, Ohio, and their newspaper, their morning paper has page after page after page of obituaries, and they still read these obituaries. And as Alice knows, some of these obituaries go on for, half a page in small print. So that my mother and sister clip them out and mail them to me. And they read the obituaries because they have so many friends and relatives, and they want to keep up with people. Hey, I just see so-and-so just died. Yeah, I knew she was sick. Too bad. Let's find out some more. So that they keep up with people by reading the obituaries. Now, someday you yourself may be called upon to write an obituary for a loved one. And I want to give you some ideas here, some pointers. This is from the Chattanooga Times Free Press for an 80-year-old woman who died. And her family wrote up a long obituary praising all her virtues as a human being, as well as some of her eccentricities. It said, "She was preceded in death by the father of their 4 children, whom she loved to her dying day, and her beloved pets." And the pets go on for half a page. But the husband was only mentioned once, okay? And then it says, "She left behind a lot of stuff her family doesn't know what to do with." And then there's a list of itemized, things, If you would, you can check them off. If you would like to come and pick up some of this stuff, leave a decent interval for us to mourn. Tomorrow would be fine. Finally, the family asks that in lieu of flowers, please write your representative and ask for the repeal of daylight savings time. We think Mom would like it if we were all on God's time. Ooh, I like that one. Okay. All right, back to the movie. A Sunday school teacher explained how God created Adam from the dust of the earth. A little boy said, "You mean I'm made out of dirt?" The teacher said, "Well, yeah, in a sense." And he said, "Well, Mom isn't going to be happy about that, you know." We don't like to be reminded that we're made out of dirt or dust. But we could construe today's gospel lesson as telling us just that. It's about us as dirt. Jesus was a keen observer of the world around him. His observations resulted in his parables. Certainly true today. He looked around and saw people planting and harvesting their crops. This is a simple parable, but it appears in all three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which suggests that attention must be paid. Listen to Jesus' words. A farmer went out to sow. As he was scattering the seeds, some fell along the path and the birds ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it didn't have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. When the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Other seed fell on good soil, where it produced 30, 60, 100 times, 1,000 times what had been sown. Farmers in those days did not have an air-conditioned tractor equipped with GPS. I looked this up, and it is true that self-driving tractors have finally hit the market. You can get one, okay? Of course, you have to be careful that you program, all the right numbers in it to make sure it goes to the right places and does what it's supposed to do. But if you do it all right, you don't have to drive a tractor anymore. If you have, the money to pay for a self-driving tractor. Jesus didn't have that. Sowing seed was by hand. In our country, we sometimes talk about Johnny Appleseed, heading west from Pennsylvania, sowing apple seeds in Ohio and Indiana and so on. He had a sack over his shoulder and he was broadcasting the seed just like the gospel story. Yes, he had a passion for planting apple trees, but he also wanted to spread another type of seed. Once in a while, Johnny Appleseed would take a break and sit under a tree and read to people as they passed by. He'd read to them stories from the Bible and from other books, spreading the word as well as the seeds. But what about the farmer Jesus talked about? How inefficient he was. That seed was going everywhere. Some of it landed on a hard path where it couldn't possibly grow. Some of it was falling on a patch of rocky soil. Some of it fell on weeds and thorns. And then the emerging plants were choked out. Some few seeds fell on good soil. That farmer was so slipshod, we can only conclude that this parable isn't even about farming. It doesn't teach you anything important or helpful. It's really about God. The seed which was sown was God's grace. God is not as efficient with his grace as he is generous. He scatters it all over the place. So in a sense, we are all dirt. It's us, it's everybody in the world. But not all dirt is the same. God's grace is available to everyone, but not everyone responds the same way. Because God gives us the freedom to decide for ourselves. God will not force himself into our lives. God's grace works differently for different people. I believe this is what the parable is about. It's interesting, this is one of the few parables Jesus bothers to explain. He's saying this is important. So Jesus describes 4 kinds of soil. And again, he isn't really interested in teaching us about growing crops. He's describing 4 kinds of people. First of all, there's the unbeliever. Whether you want to call that person atheist, agnostic, whatever, Jesus says, listen to what the parable means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and doesn't understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown. That's the seed that fell on the path. Imagine you're walking on a path through the forest. Maybe thousands of people have walked there before you. The path becomes hardened and bare of vegetation. That's what makes it a path. Soon the soil is beaten down. In the dry season, it gets as hard as a rock. In the rainy season, more water washes off than gets absorbed. Birds come along and gulp down any seeds that are left. So a seed falling on that path has little chance. Jesus said that's people who hear the gospel but don't understand it. Maybe he meant something more than just not understanding it. Maybe it's that they don't accept it. They don't take it to heart. They hear the gospel, but they don't appropriate it. They don't make it their own. I was reading the report of the psychic services industry. I don't think they're a Fortune 500 company yet, but it's a booming business because there are psychics everywhere. Did you know that psychic readings such as palm reading, tarot cards, tea leaves generate a revenue stream of $2 billion a year in this country? According to the report, atheists and agnostics, or whatever they call themselves, are the main consumers of psychic readings. According to Fortune magazine, many of them are top-tier executives, particularly in the tech industry. Which proves the validity of the observation, when people quit believing in God, they don't believe in nothing, they'll believe in anything. So that's the seed that falls on the path. The hardcore unbelievers, or nons, as we sometimes call them. Again, I say they're a growing group. So Jesus moves on to another group. Let's call them the morning glories. The seed falling on rocky ground, says Jesus, refers to people who hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But it lasts only a short time. When trouble or persecution come because of the word, they quickly fall away. Rocky soil is not as treacherous for seeds as a hard path. Plants might grow initially, but the prospects are dim. Because the soil is so rocky, the seed doesn't get the right nutrition. Without the proper nutrition, nothing grows, as it ought to. In baseball, coaches talk about the morning glories syndrome. Morning glories unfold into full bloom in the early morning and then begin to fade. So this name is given to young recruits in baseball who perform well in spring practice, but as they experience the lengthy baseball season, they begin to wilt. By June, their batting average drops to an unacceptable level, and by July, they're cut from the team. Now that's what seeds are like when they fall on rocky soil. They may take root initially, but they don't get the nutrition they need. They wilt and die. We could apply the name morning glory to many Christian believers who make an initial commitment to Christ but then fall away. A few are sincere, but when they get out in the world, they waver, they wither. Only a handful can experience the true joy and meaning and purpose that Christ brings. The rocky soil is not much better than the hard path. Remember, the barren path is the non-believer. The morning glories are those with only a minimum of faith. Now the third group. Let's call them the distracted. Jesus says they fall among thorns. They hear the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word. It is inevitable that no matter how careful the sower is, some of the seeds will fall into an area infested by weeds and thorns. These pests grow much faster than the good seed, and because they're so strong, they throttle the life out of the good seed. I call them distractions because that's what worldly worries do to us. They keep us from focusing on Christ and His will for our lives. We talk about distracted driving, but what about distracted living, where we focus on everything except Christ? General George Washington faced immense hurdles back in 1776, trying to hold an army together to face the professional soldiers of the British. The biggest challenge he faced was maintaining his troop strength. His biggest foe was distraction. Most of Washington's soldiers were farmers. When time for planting or harvest came around, these soldiers' hearts and minds turned toward home. They wondered who would sow the seed, who would gather the crops that enabled their families to survive. In these seasons, Washington and his generals faced a huge drain on their army's strength as the troops had their attention pulled away from the battlefield back to the harvest field, so they laid down their weapons and walked home. That's the seed sown where there are weeds and thorns. So, three groups: unbelievers, morning glories, and the distracted ones. Jesus knew many people who listened to him would fall away, or at least would give only minimal service in the kingdom. We all know that in any group, 20% do 80% of the work. That's sure true in church. But there's one more group, and this is the seed that falls on the good soil. We'll call them the company of the committed. Jesus says the good soil is someone who hears the word and understands it, who produces a crop 160, 30 times what was sown. These are people Jesus could always count on. And notice what he says about them. They produce a crop 30, 60, 100 times what was sown. I think Jesus is saying to us that when we give Christ our best service, our work is magnified more than we could possibly know. Our influence on our family, our community, our world is greater than we can ever see. Dale Burke wrote a book called Second Calling. She talks about attending a publishing conference with a friend named Bruce. When it was time to leave the conference, Bruce offered her a ride to the airport. As they were about to leave, a hotel employee stopped them and said the shuttle bus had broken down. Would they mind taking on one more passenger on their way to the airport? They agreed, and this man who would be riding with them gratefully jumped into the back seat. Bruce asked the man where he worked. Remember, Bruce is the driver? Okay. Bruce asked the man where he worked. The man said he worked for a Christian publishing house affiliated with a campus organization. And Bruce was excited to hear this. He said, "I have really fond memories of that group. I attended one of their weekend retreats back in 1972 in New Hampshire." Remember, Bruce is driving the car the whole time. He's the one doing all the talking. Okay. Bruce went on to explain he'd only become a Christian when he attended that conference in 1972. But a year later, he gave his testimony to his family, and his whole family came to Christ. His sister became a Wycliffe missionary, translating scripture for a tribe in Africa. His parents turned their publishing business to Christian books and published some of the biggest Christian books of the next few decades. And Bruce himself came to own a major Christian publishing house, and it brought many significant books to the public. It was obvious that the impact of that long ago retreat had changed the world. All this while Bruce was driving to the airport. The passenger grew silent, of course, listening to Bruce, but finally when Bruce stopped talking, the man said, "That retreat you're talking about in 1972, I was the leader of that retreat. It was the first time I'd ever sponsored a conference, and I was lost. I felt like a total failure that weekend. Until this very moment, I've always believed that that was the worst failure of my life." And the author, Dale Burke, says, "By the time we reached the airport, we all had tears in our eyes." You never know. You never know. You sow a small seed in someone's heart, you might reap a harvest, 100-fold, 1,000-fold. You allow the Lord of the harvest to sow a small seed in your heart, and that seed is multiplied for the people you touch. And who knows where it'll end? Where are you in today's parable? I'm not going to say any of us is a hardened path, the non-believer, because you wouldn't be here today if you were. But a few of us may be morning glories, you know what I mean? At one time we were excited, but the years have passed and our fervor may have faded a little bit. Deep in our heart, we miss it. The feeling that we're part of something bigger than ourselves, part of God's work. But in our heart, we know we've fallen by the wayside. I suspect many more of us may be among the distracted. We're so busy, who has time for God? Living in the most prosperous, secure society in the history of the world, many of us are desperately lonely, uncertain about life, guilt-ridden, or afraid. Something's missing in our life, and deep in our heart we know what it is. It's a living relationship with God through Jesus Christ. So many of us today will want to pray that Christ will help us to be the good soil, where the harvest increases 30, 50, 100-fold, so we might have purpose and peace, and that the world will be a better place. The world will be enriched somehow because we have encountered Christ. He is doing a good work through us. Amen.